December 1941. Just outside Moscow, German soldiers, once believing themselves invincible, were freezing to death in their summer uniforms. Their tanks, the mighty panzers that had blitzed across Europe, were seized solid by the brutal Russian winter. How did the seemingly unstoppable German war machine, which had conquered France in a matter of weeks, find itself utterly broken at the gates of the Soviet capital? This is the story of the Battle of Moscow, the turning point that marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's Third Reich. Let's rewind to June 22, 1941. Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers pour across the Soviet border. Their goal? To crush the Soviet Union in a lightning war, a blitzkrieg, before winter could set in. The plan was audacious, and at first it was terrifyingly successful. The German Army Group Center, the main spearhead aimed directly at Moscow, advanced with stunning speed. They encircled and destroyed entire Soviet armies in massive pockets at Minsk and Smolensk. By autumn, German panzer divisions were within sight of the Kremlin's spires. For Stalin and the Soviet leadership, the situation was catastrophic. Panic gripped Moscow. The government began evacuating. Priceless art was shipped away, and factories were dismantled and sent east, beyond the Ural Mountains. It seemed like the fall of Moscow was not a matter of if, but when. In October, Hitler launched his final decisive push, Operation Typhoon. He boasted to the world that the enemy was already broken and would never rise again. The German offensive began with yet more spectacular victories, encircling hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops at Vyazma and Bryansk. The road to Moscow seemed wide open. But then, something changed. The autumn rains began, turning the unpaved Russian roads into impassable rivers of mud, a phenomenon the Germans grimly called the Rasputitsa. Supply lines, already stretched to their breaking point, ground to a halt. Tanks, trucks, and artillery became stuck, easy targets for the desperate Soviet defenders. This crucial delay bought the Soviets precious time, and they used that time brilliantly. A new commander was appointed to defend the capital, General Georgy Zhukov. A tough, ruthless, and brilliant strategist, Zhukov immediately set about organizing Moscow's defenses. He wasn't just relying on the army. Hundreds of thousands of civilians, mostly women and teenagers, were mobilized to dig anti-tank ditches and fortifications, creating a formidable defense in depth around the city. Zhukov famously declared, "Moscow is behind us. We have nowhere to retreat." It was a line in the sand, but even with this fierce determination, the Germans were still pressing forward inch by inch through sheer force. A German reconnaissance battalion even reached the suburb of Khimki, less than 20 miles from the Kremlin, close enough to see its towers through their binoculars. It was the closest they would ever get. Just as the German advance was gasping for its last breath, the second and more famous Soviet ally arrived, General Winter. Temperatures plummeted to -20, -30, even -40 degrees Celsius. The German army was catastrophically unprepared. They still wore their summer uniforms. Their weapons froze, their engines wouldn't start, and frostbite caused more casualties than combat. The soldiers were exhausted, demoralized, and literally freezing in their foxholes. The blitzkrieg had failed its race against the calendar. While the Germans froze, the Soviets were just getting started. Zhukov had been holding a secret in reserve. Fresh, well-equipped divisions from Siberia. These soldiers were accustomed to the brutal cold, equipped with warm winter clothing, and trained to fight in these exact conditions. On December 5, 1941, as the German army lay paralyzed by the cold, Zhukov unleashed his counteroffensive. The shock was total. The Siberian divisions, supported by T-34 tanks, which performed far better in the cold than their German counterparts, smashed into the exhausted German lines. For the first time in the war, the German army was not advancing, but in a full-scale, desperate retreat. The once confident German soldiers abandoned their heavy equipment, their frozen comrades, and fled westward. Hitler, furious at the collapse, refused to authorize a strategic withdrawal. He issued his famous Stand Fast order, demanding his troops hold their ground at all costs. This decision, while preventing a total rout like Napoleon's in 1812, cost the German army dearly. They suffered horrific casualties holding untenable positions, losses in men and material from which Army Group Center would never fully recover. The Soviet counterattack pushed the Germans back over 100 miles from Moscow, completely removing the immediate threat to the capital. By January 1942, the battle was over. The cost had been immense for both sides, with casualties numbering in the hundreds of thousands, but the result was undeniable. The myth of German invincibility had been shattered. The Battle of Moscow was Hitler's first major strategic defeat on land. It proved that the Blitzkrieg could be stopped and that the Soviet Union would not collapse. The war was far from over, and years of brutal fighting still lay ahead, but the tide had turned. The road to victory for the Allies would be long and bloody, but its first, crucial steps were taken in the snows outside Moscow, where a nation on the brink of collapse rose up and told the world's most powerful army, "You shall not pass." Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into one of history's most pivotal moments. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. Let me know in the comments what battle you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious.